Okay, we are live. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. Uh, we have the honor of being joined by Sarah and Chris again. As many of you know, we did 2 interviews with them in October and November before the January 3rd kidnapping. And let's call it what it is. It was a illegal act, kidnapping President Nicholas Maduro. So we wanted to bring them back. They've been on a wild interview circuit the last couple of days, so I would encourage folks to go listen to some of their interviews. There are a few I've checked out to kind of get some of the details. I want to start you two just jump into it, right? With some of the latest. This is not how I originally was intended to start, but the latest we got on our end this morning, we were woken up, those of us who were paying attention to the news, that Trump has said he's calling off a second strike, right? And two, that he's meeting with oil executives today to discuss how to better plunder Venezuela. I'm calling BS and saying that large parts of this are just theatrics, which is even some of the oil companies have told him very clearly and explicitly at this particular point. But I wanted to ask you two, and for the benefit of those who would be listening and will be checking in later on, how is this squaring with the facts on the ground as of right now?
So I'll go in briefly and then I'll pass it on to Chris. Of course, with everything that Trump says, one has to take it at the very least with a grain of salt because he's a great liar. I have no doubt that there have been some conversations with some oil executives. That, of course, it's a stated objective to have the Venezuelan oil, which Trump calls his own oil. As for the second thing, the calling off of the second strike, actually, this is also part of the cognitive or PSYOP war. They want to have the people of Venezuela and the government of Venezuela on a situation of constant fear. What we do know is that a lot of the military hardware that they had in the ocean near the coast of Venezuela, all the ships and destroyers, etc., it's moving north, and it is actually moving towards the coast of Cuba. This is actually of great concern, and it should be of great concern to everybody who's listening, because obviously, well, they do have the objective also of ending or of killing the Cuban Revolution, and Cuba is actually going through very, very hard years because the impact of the blockade has built up in a way in Cuba that is really making the life of people very, very painful. Of course, the Cuban Revolution has tremendous moral integrity and force, so they are going to be able to go forward. But I guess my call would be to be pendiente, we say in Spanish, to be aware that right now this armada, this killer armada, is moving in the direction of Cuba.
Sure, I'll just add some things to that. I want to say from the beginning that, the government acted completely correctly here according to plan, according to the Constitution too. Everything, and developed I always say that we did everything right here. From the beginning, the communiques came out with great clarity, appealing to the anti-colonial struggle in Venezuela, the 200-year anti-colonial struggle, that immediately the defense minister came out to indicate that in the early hours of the morning of the attack, came out to indicate that the army was completely loyal. Then Delcy Rodriguez appears with with the defense minister, the foreign affairs minister, with Diosdado Cabello, the interior minister at her side, indicating that the chain of command is completely intact. So everything has been right here. And as Cedar was saying, there's a lot of cognitive war or psyops going against us. And I see this latest declaration as in keeping with earlier declarations by Trump as part of this psyop, which is also profoundly incoherent and profoundly irrational. The one thing when people see that Venezuela is opening up to certain relations with oil commerce with the United States, it's important to understand that was a longstanding aspiration of Nicolas Maduro, and it's actually what Hugo Chavez did when Hugo Chavez was alive. The main commercial partner, in the sense of buying oil from a sovereign nation, Venezuela is a sovereign nation, selling oil was the United States. This country has been under a blockade with more than 1,000 sanctions. So if Delcy Rodriguez manages to overcome the blockade in this admittedly very terrible circumstances, this should be seen as a victory for the revolution and victory for Venezuelan sovereignty. She has always highlighted that the oil that will be sold to the United States will be done in conditions of sovereignty, that the oil company here, the national oil company here, will not be under any kind of guardianship. So, and then on the other side, I also think it's important to point out the paltry nature of Trump's alleged victories. He says that they're going to have 60 million barrels of oil. I want to point out that 60 million barrels of oil is approximately $2 billion or $2.5 billion of oil. That's approximately a fifth the value of Citgo that was robbed earlier this last year. And so this, if it is a concession or if it's a partial retreat, it's a completely controlled retreat on the part of the government. And it indicates that we're in charge here, that there's sovereignty here, that we maintain sovereignty over our resources. And it's true what you say, Kali, that they desire to plunder the global South in their condition of losing hegemony in the world. Their idea of how to confront Russia and China now is to plunder the nations of the global South, not just Venezuela, but for example, India. Trump's response to the failure to put tariffs on China is that it's going to put tariffs on India, which is allegedly an ally, to compensate for the loss. So this is their new tactic, but as with so many tactics, as with their Monroe Doctrine, or whatever they choose to call it right now, there's always been a huge gap between their desire to dominate the region and their capacity to do it. Sometimes I'm hearing people on the global, on the progressive sector here, on the global North's progressive sector, which I feel suffers from a kind of defeatism often and a latent colonial desire. You hear people talk about betrayal here. There's absolutely no evidence of betrayal. And I feel that there's a kind of internalized defeatism on the part of many people in the global North. One thing that I think is important to point out here is how prepared we were here. Delcy Rodriguez activated the people. She said this would be defended by the people in alliance with the army and alliance with the police, and that's exactly what we saw. We saw the armed people go to the streets, and we saw this plan to carry out the war of the whole people against this superior military enemy, but not politically superior. Most of a military confrontation, is going to be a political factor. So sometimes I hear people in the global North talk about how the United States has shown that it can take out any leader it wants to. Well, it absolutely cannot. It would have taken out Putin a long time ago if it could. So it's absolutely false that this shows that the United States can take out whoever it wants. In fact, this relates to the threat you mentioned. When they say they're not going to attack Venezuela again, well, they're afraid of Venezuela. They're afraid of the Venezuelan people. Otherwise, they would have occupied the country. Mm-hmm. And I think there's so much evidence of how the real tactic, which is the one Delcy Rodriguez pointed to, and that was actually Nicolas Maduro's plan. If you see the declarations from early December, when there was a conference of sovereignty and peace here, there were several points in those declarations. They said Caracas would be a center of sovereignty and peace. That means everybody should pay attention to what's being said from the government here, as opposed to the irrational drivel that comes from the White House. But they also said we were going to the phase of armed struggle, and that meant the organized people against this enemy. And I just want to say that some people in the global North, I feel the leftists, progressives in the global North, they talk about the angry tide. Well, the angry tide is in the ocean. There's a lot of red, pink, revolutionary sectors here, in spite of this new angry tide that has emerged in in Chile, represented in caste, represented in Malay in Argentina. But we're far from giving up throwing in the towel here. And sometimes when I say that the left and the global north, or the progressive sectors in the global north, are forgetting our revolutionary heritage, the case of Vietnam showed that an organized people, a people with unity, a people under maintaining political order, can defeat a superior enemy. That's the key factor here, politics. There's a political plan here. There's a project for humanity here called socialism. On their side, they have no other project. The United States imperialism has no other project other than plunder, other than gangsterism. Here there's a political project which is called human emancipation, which is expressed in the communes. Here there's political order, here there's unity, and here there's determination. History has shown that can win, that will win over the short, medium, or long term. So that's what I think people in the global north shouldn't forget. And they should listen to Caracas in this war of disinformation in the United States. And people make echo. They echo Donald Trump. They echo Marco Rubio, consciously or unconsciously. There's all kinds of weak factors in the left. Some of them are probably overtly bought off, or some of them just fall prey to these psyops. But they repeat the discourse that is simply aimed at weakening the unity here, simply aimed at weakening the solidarity among peoples of the global south, and weakening the solidarity between peoples of the global south and the oppressed peoples within the global north nations. So I say push back against that. Listen to what's being said from Caracas. When Caracas was declared a center of peace and sovereignty, that means people should consider this the center of a revolution, a global revolution. They should listen to what the spokespeople are saying from here.
I'm glad you guys mentioned that, both of you, because one of the places I really wanted to highlight that is really not being discussed much here, at least in the mainstream media, is how the Armada, Trump's Armada, is moving towards Cuba. And that, very intentionally is being denied, by the press here. And one of the things that I want everybody who's listening is to just really pay close attention to how all of the mainstream media outlets, from NPR to MSNBC, they may be on the surface, challenging parts of Trump's narratives, but they are utterly repeating it. They've been given editorial directives to not call this a kidnapping. That's already been documented. They've been given directives to downplay international law, international law violations, which they're all, continuing and perpetrating. And I have no evidence for this, but the fact that it hasn't been discussed, I'm sure they've been given directives to not talk about the movement of this Armada towards Cuba, even though Rubio and several senators and Trump himself have said that they have eyes on Cuba, and that I forget what senator it was, basically said that, he expects the government to fall or to be overthrown, I think is the exact word he said, to be overthrown within a year, right? So sometime this year. I think, and I think there's also, I think if we do, and then the question is, would you all agree? I've kind of tried to interrogate, particularly Trump's narrative and Miller's narrative as one wing. Rubio actually, I think, represents a slightly different orientation towards empire than they do, and there's fractions within their own alignment. But he is very intentionally talking about, I'm going to control Venezuela for the foreseeable future. And people are not analyzing what that means for domestic politics. And people are thinking, I think incorrectly, that he's just talking about the duration of his constitutional term. I don't think that's what he's talking about. Now, and I'm not saying that what he's talking about corresponds to a truth, but I think it does. We need to be mindful of the aspiration that he has on not leaving, not intending to leave by any stretch of the imagination. He's not intending to leave, or at least his regime is not intending to leave, if it's not him and his own person, maybe J.D. Vance or someone else. They don't intend on leaving in 2028. And so it's a projection of an extended rule that's not just aimed at Venezuela. I think it's kind of more of a test case for them at this particular point in time. But I think it speaks more to, in truth, a domestic aspiration. We can't. Your mic is out, sir. We can't hear you.
So I think it is clear that that's the aspiration of Trump, and he has pretty much said as much, and he continues saying it as in this interpretation. I think that certainly, I think that when we look at how U.S. imperialism has operated over the, like here in this attack on Venezuela, indeed, their message, and I think this points to the fact that you point to, that there might be tendencies within the administration, not that there are. We know there are tendencies with the administration. So the message has been kind of chaotic. It's not only because there are factions within, also because there's an irrationality in a project that is a fascist, actually a fascist project requires irrationality to sustain itself. It cannot walk on rationality. It cannot walk on a path of, like, for instance, it cannot walk on the discourse based on liberal democratic principles, which we reject. But fascism is a rupture with that as well. I want to go back a little bit to Venezuela, and how these days, which have been very difficult but also extraordinarily beautiful days, in the sense that we have been tremendous popular response from the people. I mean, not only have we seen the government doing the correct thing, saying the correct things each step of the process, including that Delcy Rodriguez, in her first long discourse on the 3rd, she said, "We are nobody's colony," and this kind of like really stuck to the people. And actually, in Caracas, you can already see graffitis that say, "We are," actually in several places, you can see graffitis saying, "We are nobody's colony, no somos colonia de nadie," specifically. So not only have we seen the correct revolutionary discourse from the government, not only have we seen unity between the government and the military, but we have also seen massive popular support for the government, rejection for the attack, and demand for the return of President Nicholas Maduro and Cilia Flores. And these, the people of Venezuela have really shown a tremendous kind of like vision, hand in hand with the government, arm to arm with the government, a tremendous clarity in terms of the strategic objectives. There have been so many rumors that obviously come from the enemy. Was there treason? Now that there will have to be a dialogue, people are going to try to question everything that will come through the dialogue, because it's most likely that there will be some agreements signed between PDVSA and the United States corporations. So what we have seen is, from day one, on the 3rd, we were, like, everybody in Caracas heard it. I didn't have direct sight of the attacks, but heard the explosions, which were very intense, even though we were about 3 miles away from the explosions. But we heard them very, very strongly, and with the glass rattling, and then all the drones, the sound of the airplanes, supposedly 150 airplanes and drones and so on. So on that night, immediately when we heard it, nobody needed an explanation of what had happened, that this was an imperialist attack. That morning, very early, many Chavistas, many grassroots Chavistas, we made our way towards Miraflores in a pretty spontaneous movement in that direction. There was no There's a long tradition of calling for marches in Venezuela in the Bolivarian Revolution, that come both from the party, from the institutions, from the grassroots too. This one was just a grassroots kind of like self-called march towards Miraflores, and that day, like, you didn't know how you would find the city. When we came out of the house, we didn't know how we would find the city. The city was very, very, very peaceful. There were a few stores that were open, and there were some short lines of people making some, buying eggs or a few basic goods, but there wasn't a sense of panic in that moment in the city. And there certainly was a sense of brotherhood, of community amongst the people. There was, during those first hours, there wasn't one single, and since from the first hours until now, 6 days later, since then until now, I haven't seen one single expression of support for the attack. Obviously, the majority of Venezuelans are Chavistas, but there are millions of people who are opposition in Venezuela. And I haven't seen one single expression of people supporting, or heard one single expression of people supporting the attack. In social media, you will find some extremist, fascist-toed individualities celebrating the attack. But here in Venezuela, I have not seen any evidence of it. And by the way, what you have seen in terms of support in the mainstream media, what everybody probably in the global north has seen in terms of support for the attack in the mainstream media, is Miami. Surprise, surprise, Miami or Madrid. So going back to the expressions of support for the government, solidarity. The first day, it was a self-called march to Miraflores, with people speaking, with an open mic, with everybody from the auntie to the person who sells some candy to the representative, all sorts of people, the motorizado, the person who has a moto taxi, all these people from the grassroots, from the people, from the working class, and some representatives took the mic with tremendous clarity in terms of the message. Defense of sovereignty first, calling for President Maduro and Cilia to be returned immediately, calling for the defense of the government, and also looking forward towards the commune, which is our strategic objective. And they are not going to let us, we are not going to allow them to take away the dream and the construction of the commune, because the commune is not just a dream, it is actually a real construction as we speak, being the commune the way in which Venezuela makes socialism. So that was the first day, but the following days, each day the march was bigger, got bigger and bigger. The second day, some people were still staying at home, retreating at home. But each day the march was more and more powerful. In one of the marches, there was a call for basically civilian militias to come out to the streets armed, because it's important to show that this is a people's war, that this is a war in which the people of Venezuela are ready to defend their homeland hand in hand with the military, with the institutional military. So we saw something that we had not seen before, which is armed civilians in the streets with the disposition, with the arms and with the training necessary to defend. Because as Chris said, it's one thing to bomb Caracas and sequester, kidnap our president, and it's another totally different thing to control the territory of Venezuela. They cannot rule in Venezuela because here there's a Chavista government. They cannot control a country just bombing it. That's just absolutely absurd. Of course, Venezuela, and this is something that Chavez said, it's something that Chris was pointing at early. Venezuela has always had the disposition to talk with the United States on equal terms and with respect towards Venezuela's sovereignty. Right now, it will be a time when there will be a course open for negotiation. It will not be an easy negotiation. There might be some concessions that are made that go beyond what we would actually want to, but I'm sure that the government of Venezuela is not going to turn over our sovereignty to the imperialists which just attacked us. Going back to the people have been in the streets by the tens of thousands. Right now, if you look out of the window here, you will see a very normal street. But if you look at the street in, say, 3 hours or so, 2, 3, 4 blocks to the north, you will see tens of thousands of people marching. Today is the march. Yesterday it was the youth march. The day before yesterday was the communist march. Today is the Afro-descendant and indigenous march. So they are by sectors each day, and tomorrow again, which is Saturday, there will be a massive everybody's march walking through the streets of Caracas. The disposition of the people to go to the street, it's actually exhausting to go to the street every day and march for 4 or 5 hours, because we are talking about long marches. To march for 4 or 5 hours, it's actually tiring, but it's also remoralizing. It's remoralizing to be with tens of thousands of, or actually hundreds of thousands of people with whom lived like us, and many people much closer. The attacks, people who are angry because we are angry, but we are also ready to fight, and we are not going to give in. So you can count on the people of Venezuela to struggle through this one, to fight through this one, and actually we will overcome. We will win. And this will take me to the last thing, which is Nicolas Maduro's victory sign, when he's been able, in his first connection with the first moment in which Nicolas knew that he was able to deliver a message, is when he walked and saw to his right some cameras already in New York after being kidnapped. And the thing he did was very beautiful and a very important, powerful sign for the people of Venezuela, which is that he made the victory sign, and then he pointed to the victory sign. This has become in people's states, in their telephones and so on. Everybody has this sign. It's a sign that has become symbolic of the collective horizon, but also for the people of Venezuela, the communications after situations like these ones are very important. When Chavez after the 4th of February, when Chavez tried to overthrow a corrupt government in 1992, he said por ahora, for now. And that became very powerful symbol for the people of Venezuela. And right now, this sign is becoming very important for the people of Venezuela.
Yeah, I'm glad you went there. How I was originally planning on doing this before waking up to this more flood the zone propaganda from the Trump regime was to really ask you all to point out piece, and I'll just mention it. In not so much in many communications, but something that I'm trying to scratch up if time will permit. It's kind of an analogy that I'm hoping to just kind of outline here briefly. An example that I think might prove illustrative of the type of struggle those of us who kind of live in the global north need to both engage, but also kind of draw some historical inspiration and some clarity from. And I'm talking in particular about events that transpired in Guinea-Bissau in 1973. And for those who aren't familiar, Guinea-Bissau was a former Portuguese colony, and there was a continuous struggle of national liberation, which took place beginning in the official piece, at least with the PAIGC, in the 1950s with protests, a long guerrilla war that eventually wound up with the PAIGC winning, but at the cost its spokesperson and leader, Amilcar Cabral, was captured by the Portuguese in January of 1973, and it was under presumption by the Portuguese and their allies, including the United States and NATO, that if they took out the head, they might be able, to delay or if not, have the movement go in retreat. And instead, the PIGC, after that, really advanced its forces, and just was some 8 months later were able to attain independence in September of 1973. And I'm glad you all pointed out, both of you, just the nature by which, and this is something I've tried to illustrate, at least some comments on social media, that counter to the rhetoric, the facts are the government didn't collapse. There's been no massive, disruption, social disruption on the streets. The demands have been, clear, from the jump that Nicholas Maduro is still the president, that he was kidnapped, that this is a violation of international law, and that he should be returned and returned immediately. And that has been consistent. And I'm glad you just pointed out, Sarah, that the piece I found that made me think about this is what the fact that the movement and the government have been moving in lockstep with protests, with themes and focal points. I don't, if anybody who's listening who has some doubts, to be able to pull that off in less than a week's time, I'm hoping and praying I see an opportunity where the left in the United States has half of that clarity and capacity to be able to move in the face of the many defeats. But the last thing I just want to point to within that story, and this is a hope and an aspiration, and I'm calling it forth, is that in the face of the defeat in Guinea-Bissau, but also Angola and Mozambique, elements of the Portuguese military officers who had been fighting against the liberation forces went back and ended the fascist dictatorship shortly thereafter in 1974 in Portugal. And I'm drawing that, and I want folks to read between the lines in terms of thinking about what the overreach of the Trump regime is, and the nature of, again, as you're saying, not being defeatist, and to recognize that while this is, we can't deny the awesome military might of the United States. One would be foolish to deny that. But we have to recall that in the long run, they've not won a war since World War II, right? And that people have to fight in a number of different ways to overcome them. But I like the comment I heard on one of the commentators on Electronic Intifada the other day, was to always remember, the United States with its overwhelming military capacity, they always win on day one, right? But just because they might be able to, kill a lot of people and destroy a lot of buildings and raise a big fuss, they haven't been able to sustain themselves in Iraq. They haven't been able to sustain themselves in Afghanistan. I can go on and on. And that for us to keep this in mind, and I think to learn the lessons from history and to build a resolve on some of the things that we need to do to kind of step up our resistance and the pressure that we are applying within the United States to end this. Because as I said, I think a lot of this has to do with really securing their dictatorship here on the home front in the long term, more so than anything. And I think as a sign of the clear acknowledgement that they are understanding a level of overreach, and that they're not talking about democracy promotion at all. They're not talking about, trying to install Machado at all. He threw under the bus, on the very first day, and said, I think the by reverse, the quiet thing out loud, you don't have, or she doesn't have, support on the ground. And to me, that was illustrative of you all's point. Like, to install her would be to basically incite the massive civil war. And I don't think that they want that, even though I do think, and I think part of this whole thing about them holding the economy of Argentina hostage, in order to kind of secure that victory. Not that there's not right forces organized and mobilized there, but I think for them, is my view that they're trying to incite civil wars and everywhere as a key element. And I would really point to what they're doing, or at least supporting right now in Yemen as a point of fact, right? And kind of enabling the Saudis to really try to destabilize that situation there again. And I think this is, if the various forces of opposition and the state powers can be bogged down in civil wars. It's just a situation where I don't have to win. I just need to make sure that you don't win, right? And keep you destabilized as to not pose a coherent opposition. I think that's clearly part of the play in Iran right now as well. But what I want to get into, I know our time is ending and don't want to take up too much of y'all's time. One of the critical pieces I really wanted to talk about today and really just kind of highlight is, and it may involve some speculation on y'all's part, but outside of, the mobilizations to this point, what is some of the thinking in terms of how the Bolivarian, process is going to continue? How do we work, and those of us in international solidarity, how do we support the demands, starting with the demand to get Maduro back, which I think could backfire, because if they're going to give him a mic and a platform, they may pay dearly for that if he's truly allowed to speak.
I'll go first and then pass it to Sira. I want to second what you said about Guinea-Bissau and Amilcar Cabral and the struggle against Portuguese imperialism. There's so many analogies. On the one hand, Portugal, a weakened empire, attempting to save itself through colonial plunder. On the other side, the impressive, glorious struggle of the Guinea-Bissau people and the people of Cabo Verde against this empire, this weakened empire, successful, and in which I was reminded these days of Amilcar Cabral's slogan, "Unity and struggle." Mm-hmm. That's the unity of the people by which you win. And Amilcar Cabral also was brilliant in always maintaining politics in the center. The struggle was led by the party, and the military faction was subordinated to the party. That's exactly similar here. You've seen a unique political command over our armed forces and our armed people. And so following those lessons of history, and as you point out, Portugal was a fascist country, and that's completely similar to the United States right now. And it led to the Carnation Revolution. The weakening of the empire led to the Carnation Revolution, the overthrow of Salazar's dictatorship in Portugal. So this seems so many analogies. But I think one thing I want to highlight, following up on what you were saying, is that the United States has fallen under a fascist system. Mm-hmm. It's not, many people are kind of like, well, it smells like fascism, it tastes like fascism. Well, it is fascism. And there's, perhaps in Trump episode 1, it wasn't so clearly evident, but here everything is analogous with historical fascism. You have Gleichschalten, the homogenization of cultural institutions. Recently, the Kennedy Center was named the Trump Kennedy Center. You have the Gestapo in the form of ICE. What could be clear, kind of pogroms against immigrant peoples. You have the Führer principle. Carl Schmitt talked about the Führer principle, absolute submission to the leader. This is the same. You see these sycophants, Marco Rubio, Pete Hegseth, submitting themselves to contradictory statements and that follow each other on 10 minutes, saying, "Oh, the leader is right," regardless of whatever irrational thing has happened. And then the final thing I want to point out, which is really a terrible thing that's happened these past days, you can see the ascetization of military violence, ascetization of technical military apparatus, which is typical of fascism. As you were saying, Kali, fascism wins on day one. German Nazi fascism and Japanese fascism had the military advantage in terms of technique at the beginning of World War II. But that was quickly turned around through economic power, which the United States does not have right now, and by the colonized peoples who joined in the struggle against 20th century fascism and were almost certainly decisive, especially in the sense that the Russian people were fighting against their recolonization. Essentially, Hitler believed in colonizing, enslaving the Slavic people. So the Great Patriotic War of the Russian people, the Soviet Union against Nazi fascism, was essentially an anti-colonial struggle, which was then picked up by the Chinese, the Vietnamese. And so faced with this colonizing efforts in the of the United States today, the recolonization of the world, I would say they proposed to exercise colonial rights over subjects, what they see as colonial subjects worldwide, and colonial rights, the colonizers' rights over resources like oil. There's every possibility of unity among the peoples of the global South. But there's another thing that I think connects with what you were saying about the Carnation Revolution and the struggle against Portuguese fascism, which is that often in a situation of imperialism, there's a tendency to divide the working classes of the world. The working class of the global North becomes a kind of labor aristocracy. Part of the imperialist rents are passed over to the working class in the global North, and that buys them off. However, as fascism emerges and shows its face in the United States through ICE raids, through all kinds of denial of rights to citizens in the United States, exterminating them too, this provides a possibility to overcome the division of the global working class. So the working peoples of the global South people can express people who are victims of the same fascist violence. In many ways, fascism is colonial practices coming home to roost in the fascist country. That's what Aimé Césaire pointed out. He said, when historical fascism emerged in the 20th century, he said, this is what colonized peoples have always lived. So, and that's what you see in the figures of Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio is a Cuban fascist, and you can see how all of Miami's, anti-revolutionary, counter-revolutionary fascism eventually comes back to Washington. And I believe Stephen Miller, you could say he represents Zionist fascism coming home to roost in Washington. So you have these two colonial fascisms coming home to roost in Washington. But precisely the struggle of people in the United States, especially the most oppressed sectors of the working class, immigrants, Black and brown people, those people are the natural allies of the anti-imperialist struggle of peoples of the third world. So there are new possibilities of solidarity. The other thing I want to say is that in terms of what people should do, and I'm going to pass this here soon, I think the Palestinian resistance has shown that through resisting an enemy, through commitment, heroism, and persistence, you can bring people of the world over on your side. Now they're turning their sights to us, and people can see that U.S. exterminist imperialism is not only focused on the peoples of West Asia, it's also focused in Latin America. It has pointed its guns against Venezuela. It will soon point them against Cuba. But the Palestinian people have showed us, along with Hezbollah, along with Ansar Allah, that if you resist, the peoples of the world will come behind you. So this is another opportunity for people to see that the U.S. exterminist imperialist system is a global system. It proposes to recolonize the world, enslave peoples of the world. But there's possibilities of resisting. And maybe I'll end with the slogan of Che Guevara, 1, 2, 3 Vietnams. You can form these foci of struggle, unite people, and show that there's possibilities of resisting.
So I think that as we think about what the next steps are, right? I think that Chris outlines kind of like an internationalist perspective that brings us together, right? Because of the emergence of fascism, the horrible emergence of fascism in the United States, how that also opens to some doors in terms of bringing us together, the working class of the global North and the peoples of the global South. Now, I think that when we look towards the future here in Venezuela, which is also important to think about it, there are several tasks, right? I do think that even if the United States doesn't have troops deployed on Venezuela, and we also cannot rule that out, by the way, but it's unlikely. It's unlikely because they would really get a big beating. But we cannot rule it out. But as we think about the future, there are several things that I think we need to keep in mind. One is that we are actually in a people's war at the moment. So the militia has been activated, and the militia has been activated because we actually do not know if there are sleeper cells, fascist sleeper cells in Venezuela, for instance. So the militia has to be active as well as the armed forces. It seems like there's not going to be such a thing, but also we are in a moment of a people's war, because this, even though of course the Bolivarian revolution has been a situation of siege and permanent aggression from imperialism since basically at least since 2002 with the coup against Chavez. This we are entering right now a new phase. And this phase, like what is a people's war, a people's resistance war, popular war, revolutionary war? It takes a lot of endurance, discipline. It takes a coordination amongst the people and the people with the leadership. It takes a lot of resistance and disposition to sacrifice. And I think that we can see all those elements actually already activated in Venezuela as we speak. People of Venezuela have been going through such hard things, like the blockade has killed tens of thousands of people, and yet the people of Venezuela continue to support the revolutionary government. So there will be, actually, I think we will see we are seeing, and we will continue to see absolute unity between the people, the government, and the armed forces. But we also will continue to fight and struggle for the commune. As I was saying in the beginning, they are not going to snatch that one away from us. President Maduro said that 2026 is going to be the year of the communal transition to socialism. And he said it, and we know it's true. And already Delcy Rodriguez, the acting president, has said that that is our horizon, that is our objective. So there is a continuity. There is this union between the people and their government, and this union between the people and the government is because the people know that the government are with the people's project. In this sense, this is the most democratic government that you can imagine, when the people understand that the government is responding to their demands and to their objectives, in this case, the making of a new society via the commune. I think it's extraordinary. I think we are living extraordinary times. We are living extraordinary times because, in the 21st century, we haven't had many true victories in the 20th century. And even though we had one military blow, they had a victory, one military victory, one technical military victory, by the way, almost for sure with support from the Mossad, because the US tends to fuck up these kinds of actions, and the Mossad is more effective. But even though they had this one punctual military victory, we know that we will actually overcome. Why? Because we have a project that is a people's project. And you would have to kill all the people of Venezuela to actually, for the imperialist objective to be triumphant in Venezuela. And we will not let that happen. So these have been painful days. We are very enraged, but we are also happy, and we feel so full of force. And we don't only feel full of force for all the things that we have been telling you, but also because we have seen tremendous marches in the global north too, and in the global south. But in the United States, which of course, like in the core, in the imperialist core, we have seen thousands and thousands of people coming in support of the people of Venezuela. We also see the anti-genocide, pro-Palestine movement kind of like joining forces, and with the anti-imperialist position in relation of the defense of Venezuela in the United States. So, and this goes a little bit to what Chris was saying, there's an opening of a perspective. It's not just a genocide in Palestine. It's also attack on the people of Venezuela, on the sovereignty of Venezuela, which attempts to be, like a collective punishment against the peoples of Venezuela fight for sovereignty. It aims to be a teaching moment too. On the part of imperialism, they are aiming to teach the people of the global south that they should not rise up. But they will not succeed because the people of Venezuela we will maintain our objectives. We will maintain our strategy. We may, I want to say once again, have to make some concessions that are not what we would want to do. But the important thing is that we will maintain our sovereign project, our sovereign objectives, and the commune is going to stay in the center. And the commune has already been important in the defense of the sovereignty, and it will continue to be super important, and it will grow in more and more importance as the next days, months, and years come forward.
Well, if and when time permits, I'd like to have you all back for we can dive more into the communes. I want to encourage folks to go check out Chris's book, Communes Are Nothing. If you haven't got your hands on it, get your hands on it and check out the monthly review piece that was done. I think it came out last August. You can get your hands on that, or you can, look at the monthly review online for some contributions there. But I think for folks to understand how things are going to progress in the days moving forward, I'd like to have you all back for us to dive into that a little bit deeper. Well, thank you. I'm gonna let you guys go. I know it's exhausting, days and times there. We could talk for hours on end, but it's important for y'all to get back to the streets. I would definitely encourage, everybody to stay tuned to Venezuelanalysis, for a more truthful narrative to counter all of the BS that we are being fed by Western media and its various kind of agents and interlocutors. That's going to be very critical in the days ahead. And for us, those of us, situated in the heart of Babylon, to try to be as clear-headed as possible, to be out organizing our folks doing the education, which is going to be critical in the days ahead. We'll hope to strengthen the mobilizations that we know are going to come, and for us to be on alert for more wild, adventurous attacks being generated by the Trump regime, directed at Cuba, directed at Iran, even directed at Greenland. So we have a tremendous amount of work to do on this end. So get educated, stay informed, and be active. So, Sarah, Chris, want to thank you all. Any parting words before we sign off?
Yes,
I just like to end with the sign of. Oh, go ahead.
I would like to say to people to actually turn to People's Dispatch and Monthly Review. Those are also sites where I'm going to start having a bi-weekly column in Monthly Review online, mostly focused, or pretty much always focused on Venezuela. So turn to those sites for good information in relation to what is going on here, the struggle of the people of Venezuela, and nosotros venceremos, we will overcome.
Sure, I'm just going to end with the sign of Nicholas Maduro, venceremos, and echo unity and struggle, unities of peoples against this imperialist enemy, struggling together. As Che Guevara said, the present is struggle, the future is ours, and it is ours, because we have a project which is human emancipation. And so here there's political vision, here there's disposition to struggle, here there's determination and unity.
All right, comrades, I want to thank you all. Until next time.